You don't know the world you're living in.
Welcome to the future.
What even is reality? So goes the question every philosopher is stereotyped as asking. But it is a good question nonetheless, and it does need an answer. It is a question that has been asked all throughout the history of philosophy, right up until this very day. On this episode, I'm going to answer it not from a religious perspective, but rather from a somewhat technical perspective. So let's get into it. Answering the question, what is reality, will often provide a spectrum of answers, ranging from those among us who say that reality is merely the matter that makes up the universe, to those who say that reality is completely unknowable or even non-existent. This latter group is the more interesting one, because they provide us with the idea of the simulation hypothesis, which, for those of you who have seen The Matrix, suggests that reality in which we live is an artificial construct in some way. In the 21st century, this is often viewed as technologically induced, but Plato thought it was a natural effect of this world of sensation being an imperfect derivative of the realm of forms. Christians have long said that heaven is what is real and unchanging, whereas this world came to be and will likewise perish. And our old friend Descartes is known, in part, for suggesting that we might be deceived by an evil demon. There is the ancient Chinese aphorism also about a man who thinks he's a butterfly when he falls asleep, dreaming, and when he wakes up, he wonders if he is, in his current waking life, actually a butterfly, dreaming of being a man. This idea is usually called global skepticism within professional academic philosophy. And it's the idea that we can never be sure that what we are experiencing is real, or that we have any knowledge of the external world. Conceivably, we can come up with an endless array of examples. I could suggest that I was in an accident as a child and have spent my entire life in a coma, and none of this is real. Many TV shows have ended this way. I could also pretend that I am in Robert Nozick's experience machine. There's also the famous brain in a vat thought experiment as well. Literally, the list ends when your imagination does. Anybody who takes this line of thought seriously, as all good philosophers ought to, will know how unsettling this can be. Not only does it tell us that everything we know might be a lie, it tells us that we might not know anything. We are left with no knowledge, no real connection to this world, whether that be through relationships, including familial, friendly, or loving, no sense of why we are here. In short, this global skepticism almost invariably leads to nihilism and most often an existential angst. To combat this problem, philosophers throughout the ages have come up with dozens of replies and dozens more reasons for us to reject this skepticism. However, any rejection of this matrix, however convincing, can often be thrown out as part of the system which it is attempting to disprove. Skepticism has proven itself to be an incredibly durable position in philosophy. Despite this, I think there are several reasons why global skepticism can and should be rejected. The reason I think these objections work is not because they try to disprove the system from within that system, but rather because they allow us to have reality as it is, and as we have known it. So here are some of my top reasons to reject global skepticism. 1. It's not a scientific hypothesis. The idea that everything that comes to us might be a false sense impression is coherent, but totally unfalsifiable. There's no way I could ever test that hypothesis to disprove it. Even if it were true and there is no way to actually disprove it, there's no experiment I could conceivably conduct to attempt to undermine it. This reason is interesting because it takes the major strength of global skepticism and turns it into an objection. As stated previously, the major strength of this idea is that all the evidence you have comes from the system itself. So it seems reasonable that such a system would exclude all evidence that might undermine it. But if this is true, then there's no debate to even be had. Investigation is impossible. It becomes a completely meaningless and moot point because, as far as experience in this world tells us, if an idea can't be tested, then discussion about it is in vain. It almost comes down to a matter of opinion, like debating whether Antaeus would prefer a green t-shirt or a blue t-shirt. There's literally no way to know. 2. It doesn't matter. It makes no difference whether or not we are in a computer simulation, because if I don't eat food, whether that food is genuinely organic material or merely computer code, this thing that I call me ceases to exist. If I believe that I am dreaming and I kill my sister, whether I'm dreaming or not is not relevant, because I will no longer have a sister. When you get right down to brass tacks, it doesn't really matter whether this world is digital, organic, spirit, mind, matter, or something else altogether. Insofar as we must act, there are things we have to do, and things we simply can't do. And skeptics know this. Global skepticism is a belief which is entirely inconsistent with what its proponents do elsewhere. All global skeptics still drink water, all global skeptics die, they all play the game, so to speak. It might be said that these are products of the computer program, but so what? Does it matter if the computer program ending or the cessation of energy in an atom is what causes you to die? Dead is dead. And even global skeptics take the necessary precautions to avoid death and live as decently as possible. Now, some might say this kind of thinking keeps me in the Matrix, and if I just rejected this, I too could transcend and become a breatharian who doesn't eat food or develop telekinesis. But those are empirical claims. We can test those. And as much as those claims have been tested, I don't think there are many good examples of them holding up to scrutiny. They're usually falsified pretty quickly. But remember from episodes past, if a hypothesis is not falsified, it doesn't prove the claim true. So even if certain people do have telekinesis, there are other possible explanations for that. For more in-depth analysis of falsification, I refer the listener back to episodes 1 and 2. Reason number 3. The truth of this claim changes depending on how we define reality. This argument alone should end global skepticism because it can find a nice middle ground that everybody can be happy with. One of my favorite philosophers, C.S. Peirce, very eloquently gave his definition of what it means to be real in an essay called Critical Commonsensism. He says, "A real is anything that is not affected by men's cognition about it." In his more famous essay, How to Make Our Ideas Clear, he says, "The opinion which is fated to be ultimately agreed to by all who investigate it is what we mean by the truth. And the object represented in this opinion is the real." Lastly, in his essay, The Fixation of Belief, he tells us that there are real things whose characters are entirely independent of our opinions about them. Those reals affect our senses according to regular laws, and though our sensations are as different as our relation to objects, we can ascertain how things really and truly are. And any man, if he have sufficient experience, and he reason enough about it, will be led to the one true conclusion. So what do all these quotations tell us? Well, the strongest claim we can make is that there's something out there. We can't conclude what it is, so it might be a computer program or it might be mere matter. It could also be Bishop Berkeley's world of ideas or a world of process and flux. But we have to come to terms with the fact that there is not nothing. I will admit that most global skeptics do not deny an external world outright. They simply question our capacity to understand it. And this is where I see a compromise. The skeptic can have his unknowable external world while maintaining and conceding that whatever is out there has a genuine effect on us, and we have to interact with it. Some modes of interacting with this external world benefit us, some harm us, and many of them can kill us. But the point that Peirce is trying to make is that whatever it is, it has real effects on us. And anything that has a real effect can't be considered unreal. In short, the compromise could be that reality might be different than what we think it is, but nonetheless, it is just as real as we have always thought it to be. After all, what we experience here in this so-called fakery really does prompt us to think. It really does leave us with emotional baggage. It really does leave its impression on our mind and body. It's all we know so far. It doesn't matter if this body and this mind are made from chemicals or computer code. This reality shapes us, affects us, and for as long as we can remember, it has been all we know. We were raised in it, and we are children of it, at least to some degree. Reason number 4. The method of the skeptics is a complete failure. This one is primarily for an extreme type of global skepticism called solipsism, which is the idea that knowledge of anything outside the individual is inaccessible, or worse, there is nothing outside the individual, i.e., none of you are real and you're only in my mind. But it can also be applied to the more moderate versions of global skepticism, which simply call into doubt our ability to have knowledge about the world around us. Basically, the argument is that if we embark philosophically with this type of skeptic method of denying reality or denying external knowledge, which you will notice I have been weaving between these two ideas, we leave room for different interpretations by different people. Some might say this is true, some might say this is false, others might say something different, but despite that, the actions of every single person is going to be similar. They're going to act as if they are real. Only a deranged solipsist with a mental disorder is going to go out and shoot a bunch of people because he doesn't think they are real. Simply stated, a method of settling doubt with falsifiable hypotheses and experiments has demonstrated itself to be immensely effective in millions of instances, whereas denying reality almost always leads to death, destruction, despair, and doubt. Skeptics use the scientific method every single day more than they use their skeptic method. For a more complete explanation of what I mean by the scientific method, I refer the listener back to several episodes, primarily episode 6, Why Do We Think, and episode 2, Pragmatism versus Skepticism, and episode 1, Is the Earth Flat? Another way of putting this is to say that even though believing in an objective reality and acting as if we have knowledge about that reality might not be capital T true, it doesn't ruin us to act that way. And in fact, it has proven itself to be one of the most beneficial ways of acting and believing. Thanks for tuning in. I hope there are some skeptics in the audience who want to discuss this further. Leave a comment down below if so, and I will respond. If a criticism is interesting enough, I might make a video response. Until then, don't forget to subscribe to stay notified for next week's episode, and hit that like button.
They were men seen, either that or everyone else's.